On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Aaron Wilkerson. He is the Senior Manager of Data Strategy and Governance at Carhartt. We're going to be talking about improving business outcomes. Aaron works at a CPG company. We're going to be talking about what that means. What are you looking to improve? Obviously, if you're making, selling, shipping, there's a lot of data points you're capturing. What should you be focused on? The strategy around that, and how should you become more accountable and take more ownership of those business outcomes if you're responsible for data, or even it could be applied to different technology pillar, really. Aaron, I'm excited to have you on. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely, Amir. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this discussion.
Absolutely. And truth be told, Aaron's a trooper because I had to reschedule for two medical reasons, and he stuck through. So I'm super grateful that he bore with me. I'm excited about this episode. You come from an area and industry I think a lot of people have asked to do it, cover a little bit. And I know your background's data strategy. We're going to be talking about CPG. I know a lot of people should know about Carhartt, but just in case they don't, can you just tell everyone what the company does?
Yeah, I would say at a high level, one of our taglines is "We exist to serve and protect hardworking people." So a lot of people know us by the little Carhartt patch. So we have the hats that people like, the T-shirts with the pocket T-shirts with the Carhartt logo on it. So we make all different types of product for rugged products for hardworking people. So your people in the trades. We have a partnership. For example, the Weather Channel wears a lot of Carhartt products. I think different airlines, their employees wear our Carhartt products. So anything attached to hardworking people, we have products that serve to meet that customer base. So founded in 1889, family-owned private company. Still around after 130 plus years. So we must be doing something right. So definitely, I've been there for a year. So definitely proud to work there. It's local to Michigan. So a nice local company for us. So it's a great place to be at.
Absolutely. We're going to be talking about data strategy and really in the context of improving business outcomes. And before we kick that off to really define what that means for a CPG company, a company like Carhartt, you actually said something interesting because I think you described the company and used the term hardworking people a couple of times. And I think it really resonated with me because I actually then, I knew the brand, but when you said it, the rest of everything just fell into place for me. I go, oh my God, that makes so much sense. I've only seen the brand because people wear it and I'm familiar with it. But once you said those terms, all the little dotted lines kind of, all the dominoes were lined up for me. When we're talking about when you have that, and it's an older company, been around for a long time. When you're looking at that and when you join and you understand that's what the company is really about, that's their why, and you're part of data strategy, do you start incorporating that in terms of how you approach the strategy? Obviously, they have a desired business outcome. Just because it's very unique, I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the data, like when we talk about data strategy, everyone talks about it ties to the business strategy. So at the end of the day, you have to kind of connect, the big things around. I always say, there's core questions that we should ask ourselves is, why does this business exist? Why are we around? How do we make money? How do we kind of take our products and why we exist and kind of introduce them to the marketplace and get rewarded via, people buying our stuff? And our operating model, right? How do we actually get our products to market? So I think all those kind of core things you really have to kind of understand. And working for a company like Carhartt, you think about our different customer bases. You think about the people that wear the product. A lot of the words, right? So we use words like durable, rugged, protect, serve, hardworking people. So I think making sure that we tie our data strategy to that in terms of how we talk with our business partners, how we talk about our customers, the words that we use. I think that kind of it continues to make us relevant to our stakeholders. And so I think really trying to make sure that we're also understanding the brand of the company and the brand of our products makes our data strategy relevant. So we're not presenting something that doesn't resonate with our different stakeholders. So we don't show something and say, hey, this is what we're thinking. And this doesn't really mesh well with kind of what we're trying to do. So I think, to your point, really making sure that we understand it. Luckily we're an apparel company. So you do that by, wearing the product, right? So I bought in my year of working at Carhartt, I bought more clothes in the past year than I have probably since high school. So it's a lot of that is like, just wearing it. Like, I have a Carhartt t-shirt on right now. My kids have it. I was talking to my mom and, she wants to buy some, right? So I think it's really making that attachment to the brand via learning the verbiage, being a customer yourself of it. It's kind of like the phrase eating your own dog food. So I think all those kind of things tie into making your data strategy relevant is kind of attaching yourself to whatever brand. Luckily, I've worked for a CPG company, so it's easy to wear that. My previous company was a daycare company, but luckily I had young kids, so I can attach to that. So I think it's really just attaching what your company does from a product to services and making kind of bringing that home and connecting it.
Absolutely. In improving business outcomes, obviously we could talk about productization of data. We could talk about data strategy, and I think business outcomes sits at the top of everything. And I'm actually going to kind of work reverse. I know we were going to kind of save having a seat at the table conversation, but we're kind of talking about strategy. I think it probably helps us to kind of continue. When you're looking at business outcomes and you're looking at having that voice and talking to the right stakeholders about the right messaging, and they obviously don't. Yeah, they do care, and it's your job to get the data strategy correct. But they don't really care, right? They don't care if the plumbing takes 2 weeks or 2 months. They need what they need. When you're in that position, the business needs the tools to be enabled to kind of move forward in those business outcomes. There is an implication of having a seat. There's a certain expectation. Talk about that a little bit. Talk about the implications of having a seat at the table, because data is becoming more and more. We're starting to see data leaders move into other roles, operations, CTO, CEO roles. Kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, when we talk about digital, data is a huge portion of that. So at the end of the day, Carhartt is a product company. And because we're a product company, because it's digital, like data is a centerpiece of that. So if you think about the shirt I'm wearing, like it has a style, right? It's a t-shirt, not a long sleeve shirt. It has a color. I don't know what the color is, kind of like a butterscotch, right? So it has a style t-shirt, it has a color, has a size. This is a large shirt. Dimensions, right? Regular versus long or things like that. So all those different components of it, like, are all different data points that someone has to provide. So I think when we talk about having a seat at the table, is saying that, hey, even though we make money by selling our products, we sell them on like a e-com platform, right? So all that information has to sit on our e-com platform, right? If we don't provide the right data on our e-com platform, we can't make sales and we can't make money. So I think part of that is making sure that we attach what we do to the actual, like, making product, selling product, or shipping product. In my example, it's more about selling, right? So our ability to sell product means that we have to have the right data available on the site and is correct to sell to customers. So I think it's attaching kind of data to the business workflow in terms of revenue, right? So we have data is a revenue critical process where if the data is not right, we don't make money. So I think with that, that means that we need to make sure that as a data, we working in data, we have the ability to kind of have a seat at the table and say, this is how data is important. When talking about governance, this is why it's important to make sure you have the right data points at the right time in the right place. When there's challenges, we can tell people, hey, this is why, this is important. This is why governance is important, because we don't get this right, we don't make money. So I think it's really trying to attach like those outcomes, right? So if we think that we're going to make a certain sales target for a season, so as we're getting to the fall season, we sell a whole new line of product. If we have 50 new lines of product, that's 50 different, or 50 times X many data points that has to be there. So I think when we talk about outcomes, I think it's really trying to attach what the company's trying to do from a day to day, week to week, to kind of the work that we're doing, and making sure that we have ownership and making sure that people understand that we're not just the back end, like we're on the front end of how the company makes money. So I think it's really that the mind shift around that, we're also as equally important as supply chain or planning or merchandising, right? Data is a critical component because without that, none of this works. So I think it's part of that is really trying to make that attachment. I think a lot of people have the challenges. They don't attach the work they do to like those core questions around why we exist, how do we make money in the operating model.
Absolutely. And I guess, you guys you sell apparel, things move quickly, right? You could see, social media itself could turn a business 10x, 100x without even thinking about it. I guess when you're looking at strategy and you're looking at this type of business in particular, and you're looking at potential growth of other areas, right? It could be marketing's doing a different tactic, different job, different approach, social media, all that stuff. And you're looking at that and you're trying to plan, right? You're trying to partner with them, obviously. And sometimes those things might move faster than data can move, just because obviously they have a little bit more agility and they don't have plumbing sometimes. How do you partner with those teams? How do you handle that type of thing? Because obviously you guys have a unique brand. Social media could be fuel to the fire.
Yeah, I would say, it kind of depends upon kind of how the fiscal calendar works. We do a lot of our go-to-market process is very much like a year in advance, right? So right now we're doing a lot of work for like the next season, a year from now. So we're kind of always working kind of like 3 seasons where we're planning for the next season. We're currently in production for for fall 23. We're currently in production there. So it's really trying to navigate between kind of what's the most critical path around like what needs the most attention, because also we're planning out and making sales for a future season. So that could also be like we need to make sure they have the right product set up so that we can sell our products to get ready for orders for next season. We're currently, with our .com, we're fulfilling orders for this season. So I think it's really trying to understand how the business works in terms of like what's the best use of our time and kind of what are those critical areas and kind of what part of the season we're in and what kind of part of the business calendar we're in. And that kind of goes to the business literacy of understanding how the business functions. Because in the data side, I may think that, me doing X, Y, and Z is most important, but the business may say, hey, we're not able to fulfill orders. We can cancel orders and that affects our bottom line. So it's well, yeah, that's, that's very important too. So thinking about speed, I think is making sure that we understand, the priorities of kind of what people are asking for. Like it may be like I've seen it before where something that's important to one group is not very important to another group and vice versa. Or you have to understand, okay, what's the impact, right? So you're trying to rush me to do something. What's the impact? Is it going to hit revenue? Is it cost reduction, cost avoidance? So I think it's really trying to understand it, because also we don't want to be like order takers. So I think it's making sure that it goes back to the being a seat at the table, is making sure I have just an equal voice to say like, yeah, this is important. We need to expedite this, or hey, this is important for you, but we have other kind of critical items that we need to make sure we keep up on, or making sure we fully understand the problem. So understanding the full problem and like making sure that because I know that you do want to move fast, but sometimes you can move too fast where either like you realize that was a mistake to make a change or certain people weren't involved with the decision. So I think it's really trying to understand the right amount of like understanding the problem and framing it correctly and getting people together. Because I think that's the challenge we have, is that working remotely is that when you're in the office, you can grab a bunch of people and go in a conference room and figure it out. But when you're remote, trying to find people and get them on the calendar, get on a meeting notice could take a couple of days. So I think, that's kind of the rub, is really trying to fully understand and frame the problem, and making sure that it's the right allocation of resources and strategy, allocation of resources to attach a problem. Like, okay, what's the speed of this problem? Like, is this a one department issue, or is this a cross-functional type of challenge? So it's kind of a different layered approach and answer, kind of trying to understand it. So I think it's a elevated strategic vision of that versus more tactical where, well, so-and-so has a problem, so I'll jump on this. Where it's like, well, that may not have been the right approach.
So I guess, as you described it, so obviously there's different types of CPG companies. In your case, you guys have current sales, current season. You're forecasting seasons forward. So that seems obviously some planning. If I have a product and it's just, it's a widget and I'm selling it, there's not a lot changing there. Maybe I ramp up or ramp down based on forecast, but I'm not creating new widgets. In your case, as they're looking at that forecast, that they're trying to anticipate trends, that they're doing their research. When we talk about, seat at the table and you're partnering with these teams, I guess there's a bit of pressure on you to get the data right? They're counting on some of those metrics, some of those insights, and also driving, they're all hearing all these fancy things about AI and everybody's using these capabilities. They want better capabilities. They want better forecasting. I guess it's 2 questions. One is how do you try to do your own forecasting for the team in terms of data strategic tools, but also, when it comes to helping them understand, having that seat at the table, having ownership, accountability, you're working on some, a bit of magic forecasting as well.
I would say part of that is just, I would say it's a very, I call it kind of like a full contact sport where it's a lot of just conversations like this. Like it's stakeholder engagement. It's making sure you understand who's responsible, right? 'Cause I think a lot of the even forecasting and planning, a lot of that depends on data, right? It's a, hey, we need, in order to forecast demand, we need to make sure we have the right products. So it's like, hey, if you don't have the right products set up correctly in the beginning, you can't forecast on products that you didn't even know existed or weren't even there. So I think part of it is just like going to bear tactics of like, do we have the right, like from governance perspective, like, hey, do we have all the right, products and materials in our systems so that, we can forecast and we can do demand things like that. So I think that's where we talk about like AI and machine learning, like all that depends on data and data governance is, and a lot of that kind of ties back to the people and process where it's okay, which group is responsible for giving me that? If something's missing, well, which group was supposed to give me information, but they didn't? So I find that a lot of that is just kind of very bare bones, just like discussion like this, where we talk about, okay, what are the challenges? Who's responsible? Because while we do try to automate a lot of things, there's still some things that are just manual, right? It's a person that's supposed to send information, a person supposed to put data into a system that didn't. So a lot of it kind of gets into governance, workflows, process maps, flow charts, those who does what kind of models. So I would say, I mean, that's a lot of the work is just kind of having conversation like this. In many cases, like you don't even talk about data. You're talking about people, process, and technology. And like you very even use the word data, because you realize, well, this group was supposed to do this, or this process didn't happen, which is the reason why the data wasn't there. So you find that kind of if you take away a lot of the buzzwords, it's just discussion like this and talking with people and talking about people and processes and making sure that those are aligned. Because the technology does what's supposed to do. Like if you configure it correctly, it's the people. Like it's the people that didn't do the right step, they missed a step in the workflow, they didn't fill out something right, and that's really what caused a lot of the challenges, which you end up digging into is that part of it.
Yeah, and I guess, as you mentioned, that seat at the table, having ownership, accountability, but also you mentioned governance. So introducing processes, introducing expectations, introducing when we're talking about AI, you need to work on labeling. There's governance components. There's so many different things that you need other teams to be a part of. When you have that seat at the table and you're helping set that data strategy and you're trying to get people to do what you said, people process to follow those rules. I mean, this is not a new problem. This is a problem that's decades old. Anyone that has any kind of CRM anywhere ever knows that this is a problem. And when you want to bring more strategic tools to the company, this is even a bigger problem because that becomes a blocker itself. I mean, how do you help explain to management, to stakeholders that to have advanced tools, to bring in some of those more sophisticated things that could help the company? Some of these processes have to be adopted. They have to come into play. They have to be followed.
I mean, I say that gets into change management, which is a big part of a lot of what I work on is change management and like education and training. That's a big portion of it because a lot of the stakeholders we work with like are very siloed. They know that they have a very specific function, right? They work on very like you talk about planning. You have your product group. You have your supply chain. They were brought in to do very specific tasks. But for like, if you take a step back for our role in the data side, we cut across all that, right? So we have to cut across and say, well, we need data from these groups, or these groups have to do this in order for us to get the right information. So I would say a lot of that goes into training and education, which is like, it's not sexy work. Like no one ever talks about like, your training and education conference or, it's really just trying to make sure that people are knowledgeable of kind of and also accountable, right? So how do you make sure people understand who's accountable? How do you make sure that person's leader understands there? Because sometimes the business function leader doesn't know that his group is responsible for that, and that's why it broke. So that kind of goes into the training education around like, okay, here's the groups that are responsible. Do they know that they're responsible? Do they have the right tools and capabilities? So I think that kind of like it's a large amount of work just trying to because also remember these people have day-to-day jobs, right? So you only get an hour of their time, like, per week to kind of explain something. Because once you leave, they're going to go back to doing what they were doing before. Like they're going to completely forget about your meeting. So that's part of it is really just the change management and the communication portion around like, how do I make sure that they're informed of how they fit into the world? And like, if something breaks, like, okay, this is why we can't do these things, or we're going to bring in this new technology, but it's only as good as your team's ability to do this, right? So I think that's the big, C word or CM word is change management and education, which is kind of, we don't talk about it a lot, but like that's what's required when we talk about transformation and even AI. I mean, that's all about change management, process flows, workflows, productivity, like all that kind of stuff is like, even the best AI can't outwork a bad process or a team that doesn't know how they fit into it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I used to have, I still do have. I have security people on, and they talk a lot about security, cybersecurity champions. I mean, it's a big component of their job. And I was asked, it's one of the few areas that needs this champion because it requires individual people to adhere to processes, and it's almost like you need that advocate on the ground. And now, as AI is taking hold and data governance is coming to the fore, I'm talking to data leaders, and I'm like, oh, so you need a champion too? Of course we do. We need the advocate on the ground because the software engineering team, they're in a bubble. They have their own flow. No one really impacts them too much. The QA piece is the first time they really get exposed to the outside world, and that happens based on methodology and all that stuff at different phases. But they don't need somebody on the business to follow a certain process for them so that they can do the job. They're going to write the code. It's going to go. For you and implementing like this data, having more strategic viewpoint, we're talking about governance, change management. All of a sudden, you need a champion. And it's interesting because it's been cybersecurity that's been looking at a cybersecurity champion. As you're looking for your champions internal, how do you see that evolving, especially as people are going to want to use AI more and they're going to have to start realizing they are a bigger part of the solution than they probably ever realized?
I mean, I think a lot of that is trying to it's kind of like the non-invasive data governance. I think Rob Steiner wrote about that. So you want to embed yourself. You don't want to create new problems. You want to embed yourself into existing challenges, right? So finding the champion is finding a person who is welcome to have, like, who wants to talk to you because you're going to help solve a problem for them. Like, you don't want to give someone work and say, hey, like, I want to make you our new champion. I need to do these 3 things, but they're like, I don't care about this. I don't want to be your champion, right? So you want to find people where you're like, if you show up with a solution, they're like, thank you, this solves a problem for X, Y, and Z. So even with AI, I think that you have to make sure that it's going to make someone's life easier. Kind of the big 3, right? It's going to either help with their process, with revenue, cost reduction, or cost avoidance. So if you can't tie yourself, go back to business outcomes, if you can't show how them helping with this initiative is going to help out some type of business outcome, then you're going to have a very hard problem there. And I think that's where we struggle on the governance side because we kind of tied it to like, data and reporting, which people are like, yeah, I don't really I don't see how I can help with this because they don't really care about this stuff. So you really have to kind of find the folks that who want to be part of the journey. The folks that want to be a part of this, you really need to kind of find those folks and have them a part of the initiative and kind of be your champion. Because you can only do so much by yourself. Like, you can't, if you sit within IT, if you sit within the data team, you can't do this all by yourself. You need folks in the business who will be part of that, who will be your partner and join up with you. Because if you try to do it by yourself, you're just going to burn out and be frustrated. So you also need someone who's just as excited about this as you are and can show them hey, if you do this, this is going to help you in your own performance, right? You're going to help out you with your performance review, trying to tie it to incentives. I mean, if they're incentivized on a certain outcome, showing them how this new initiative or this data governance or AI is going to help with their process, which ties to their outcome, which ties to their performance and their incentives, really is beneficial. So, you have to help someone with existing problems. You don't want to create new problems for someone.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like, you said a few things there: embedding yourself in the solution, finding people that want to be a part of the journey. I think previously, it seems in the data space that a lot of times you needed people to do things to help facilitate. And I think and that typically had been some type of reporting legacy type stuff. But now we fast forwarded to where AI has come into play, and you're talking about, I need you to be a part of that. I need you to realize that this is going to provide you some ROI. And I guess when the conversation, and I don't know if you guys have implemented AI yet, or where you're in the journey, I guess that's maybe a separate conversation. But as you're kind of thinking about ROI, and every tool has to provide some value back, companies really haven't had that experience of knowing what these tools are going to provide in terms of value. We all are seeing, through the consumerization side, immediate results. We're seeing some benefits, but an enterprise that might have to spend some money, right? I mean, some of these LLMs are going to be expensive. Some of the solutions, even that are embedded within a lot of the products, software products that you guys use, will come with cost potentially. How is a person or a company going to start looking at those ROIs to understand when they've probably had very little, actual practical experience in it?
Yeah, I mean that's a challenge we face, and I think that's why you see a lot of like I talk about all the time, where you see a lot of CDOs either leaving companies or even getting forced to resign or getting fired because we have a hard time in the data space trying to attach what we do to like values and outcomes. I don't have an answer or a solution. It's kind of like even I'm working through that myself. Is because ROI, the top line of that is like the benefit, right? You're trying to compare the top line, revenue benefit to the cost of the see like is a juice worth the squeeze. So I think trying to understand like how what you do ties back to business outcomes, like the numerator, even attribution, right? I think that's why at a previous company I was at, I even was working on that. Like, how do we tie like a report, a dashboard to a decision that helps the company, like, make money. So you can kind of, because marketing does that. I always say that we can learn a lot from marketing because you look at a CMO, all their metrics about like, campaigns, like how did that campaign drive revenue? How did this marketing spend tied to top line revenue? Like marketing has been doing this for decades. And that's why you see like the CMO, I know even that role is kind of struggling this too, but I think that we have to kind of learn something from that group to say, how do we kind of lean in and kind of get the seat at the table to say, hey, like, this data is time or like this LLM, this AI, like the stuff that we're doing is providing this benefit and we're getting attribution, right? So if the company made an additional $10 million, how do we kind of boldly work with finance and say, hey, like we need a piece of that. We need to be able to say that $10 million, 100,000 of that came from the data group of that, which we spent 50 grand on it. And that's how you kind of get to your ROI. So that's something I've been working on is like trying to do that, that valuation of how do we start to tie our what we're doing to the overall company top line. Like I said, marketing does it all the time. I mean, you can't. They struggle to even try to make that causal relationship. But I would say they'll still do it. They will still say, "Hey, like this campaign brought, us spending $10 million on LinkedIn is going to drive the company $50 million." So I think we also need to be as bold and brash as some of our counterpoints in different business functions say, like, "Hey, we did that too, and we should also get a piece of that as well."
Interesting. You mentioned actually that actually is very interesting. To piggyback off that, you mentioned the CDO role, and obviously, yeah, I just was kind of you mentioned I was kind of curious about your opinion as the role. I mean, it seems like the role is going to evolve way quicker with the implications of AI and the expectations of some of these various facets. Engineering is really creeping into the conversation a lot more just because of how much heavy lifting is now needed to implement some of these solutions and the matrix nature of these teams. Any thoughts on how that CDO role might evolve in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's like it either grows or it's kind of like people always talk about CDO needs to be at the C-suite and needs to report to the CEO. But people don't realize that like if you report to the CEO, you are ultimately like accountable to business performance. So the CEO is going to look at you and say, okay, how is what you're doing either increasing top line, expanding the bottom line through cost reduction or like cost avoidance? So unless the CDO has that strategic lens to say, hey, this AI, this thing is going to drive company revenue, you're gonna have a problem there. So I think that's where you're gonna see either like the really good folks who can do that will be there. But if you can't, then I think that's where the role kind of folds under like operations or finance or marketing, where you're gonna see like either you're still there or like you have. But I think a lot of that is individual specific. I think the role has a lot of opportunity, but like I said before, you really need to have ownership and accountability to some type of business performance. You can't just sit there and say, "Well, I can't do anything because I just provide data. I'm not responsible for what someone does with it." Like you can try that one time, but you won't be invited back to the conversation. So I think that's why it's like not only have you have a strategy, you also have to figure out how to execute and have some type of accountability. So you have to ask for it, right? So if your company has a revenue meeting, like how do you own like the revenue meeting? How do you own and be accountable for business performance? Because like finance has ownership, HR has ownership, even marketing has, like, that's why I'm saying, like, you have to kind of have some type of ownership and accountability. And if the CDO can't do that, then I think that's where you see the person leave the company, or you see it kind of become a head of data role under like IT or operations. So that's why I think that we're still trying to figure out the role, just because I think that there's high expectations of that role, because it kind of has a title that I think we're still trying to figure out where it fits at. Because it used to be just data governance, and I think they realized that, like, yeah, you can't, like, governance is great, but it's not. We're playing defense, not offense. So I think now you're seeing it switch to more offense related role. But then it's like, how do you take the data and actually like drive business performance when you have operations under a different group, all these people under a different group? So I think that's where you're going to see either really grow or really just kind of back up for a couple of years so we figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, because you actually kind of articulate that with the CMO and the $10 million spend on LinkedIn, expecting an X return, whether or not there's a direct correlation, or correlation there. But I think when you talked about having a seat at the table, and now you're talking about, hey, we're going to invest in these tools. Can you actually go through and can you show that this moved the needle at the corporate level? Not what you're doing in data, which actually makes sense of what you said, but at the corporate level, is this moving the needle? If you can't paint a compelling story, and I'm not even sure how you do that, because obviously a lot of this is matrix. Yeah, I think you have a lot of problems, especially in a CPG environment where there's logistics, there's marketing, there's production, there's so many different facets. I mean, this probably applies to a lot of different companies as well, but being able to re-articulate that matrix just for one data person talking to the CEO, that seems like a hard job.
Yeah, 'cause if you think about, like, a lot of, you look around the business landscape, even our sales team. Also, I always talk about, like, sales. We should also look at, because you look at what sales teams do. They're all about forecasts, right? They're talking about sales forecasts and they're comparing to actuals, right? So monthly, quarterly, they're talking about, we forecasted we were going to make this much money, and we're either on track or we're behind, and how are we going to make up that ground? So to your point, we have to be able to show, like, hey, from our forecast, we think that this tool is going to help us bring in this much extra money. And if we're far behind that, like, we're accountable, just like our sales team is accountable to like finding out how to make up that ground. So I think that's where we have to figure out how to, like, that's where I think is the work is trying to figure out how to attribute the work that we're doing in data products and AI and all this stuff to like forecast. Like, how do we show, because we introduced this new tool or thing, we're now going to be able to hit our forecast, or we're going to like, so that's where I think the work is in our space, is like trying to make those bold claims. Because we said we want to see the table, we're welcome to the table, but now you're accountable to those metrics, just like your chief revenue officer is, just like your head of products are, your brand strategy, right? All those folks, like, this is what they live and breathe in. Like, this is not something new. This is what other departments do all the time. I just think that we're new to it because we've never, like, we're asking for that seat at the table. We have it now. And it's like, welcome to the table. Here's what we've been talking about, like, for years and years and years.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also run a second podcast that's for the talent people community, HR leaders, and that seat at the table is something that gets talked about quite a bit, because a lot of those changes are instrumental. But again, it's such a matrix nature of the role where it requires so many different people. I think what I'm taking away from what you're saying is, as the role is less departmental, it's more matrix. Who's accountable? And I think we kind of started talking about business outcomes, ownership, and accountability. How do you assign that accountability when maybe 70% of the work isn't even in your hands? And I think that's interesting, as I think, if you're, in your role as a business outcome and you're driving that, as a CPG company, you have so many different teams you're supporting and you're seeing the incremental progress. But how do you actually turn that into a dollar amount? And you're the data guy. How do you do that? That'd be an amazing breakthrough.
Yeah, like I said, I'm working through it. I mean, that's what I do day to day, is like trying to answer that question, which we all, I think a lot of us in the data community are trying to answer that question. I think, some realize, I think everyone has to realize, I think at a certain point in your career, I realized a couple of years ago when I was, kind of trying to be more strategic. At a certain point, you realize you can only get so high before you realize that, like, I have a ceiling where I can go until I transition to the strategic role and start to try to attach what I'm doing to value. Because you see, that's where people are growing in companies, like, is because they're attaching themselves to business outcomes. Like, I saw a couple people, like, quickly move to manager, director, senior director, and VP because they were tied to revenue, right? They can attach what they're doing to the growth pillars of the company, and like it popped up pretty quickly. So I think that's where I think a lot of us are kind of, working towards like trying to answer that question, which I think is evaded us because no one really looked at it. So I think a lot of people in the space that are working on answering that question, because I don't think we have a good answer yet. Because your point is matrix, right? So if I'm in data, I don't have operations folks that report to me. So it's like, okay, how do I dotted line get responsibility? Like I have to ask for it. Like, okay, how do I go and ask for like I want to own this this function, or I want to own this process, or like I want to take responsibility for this? And it's like I think that's part of it is you have to grab something and say I want to own this meeting or this team or this process that potentially can drive revenue for the company, which is new for a data person to do that. But I think how else do you attach what you're doing to business value unless you own something and say, this is my portion of it and I own and I drive it. Kind of like, some people have P&L responsibilities, like they own different product lines. Like you have to kind of own something like that someone can attach to what you're doing.
And it's interesting as you outsource more, as you move away from building these capabilities to having outsourced tools brought in, more finished solutions, you'll have a smaller team as well. So you won't even have as big a data team if you're purchasing a solution or you've bought a solution that's incorporated in your other software. Now you're leveraging, and there's a cost implication, but you don't necessarily have the headcount to go, hey, I've got a bigger team I'm even managing. Not that really is a big issue, but I think it's actually a perception thing because you're now maybe not even functionally responsible for delivering that technology. It's more for the vendor selection. It's a vendor decision, but it's interesting. I think cybersecurity professionals, I think people in the HR side see this a lot. I think data people now, as the seat of the table conversation, as you've articulated, I think it'll be an interesting next couple of years. And you're the thick of it, so I will have to have you come back on and kind of talk about progress and down the road.
Yeah, like I said, I think, like I said, there's a lot of functions are getting to the table. I think IT saw this. Like, I think a lot of CIOs struggled 20, 30 years ago, but now you're seeing like the rise of digital. Like you're seeing CIOs change to CTOs, or like CDO, like chief digital officers, because they can tie digital strategy to growth, right? Hey, because we implemented this mobile app, we're seeing sales through our mobile channels or digital channels like skyrockets. You say, hey, I was in charge of that. So I think we have enough examples with our peers in different departments, even in IT, to say this is what they did. So I think it's more like we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to see what they did and follow along what they did. Because like I said, IT, I think data is kind of, we're the newest ones here, but IT did this for the past 20, 30 years to kind of establish themselves. I mean, look at the pandemic. Look how many companies revenue grew through digital channels. Like I'm sure the CTOs in the company said, hey, that was my group. We did that. I can attach myself to that.
I love it. We're gonna call it on that note because I think that's a great note to wrap up on. Hopefully, we'll have you back on down the road to see how things have progressed. Aaron, if somebody wants to reach out to you to talk to you about anything you've discussed, what is a good way of getting a hold of you?
I would say LinkedIn. I write on LinkedIn every single day. I write about a lot of these exact same topics. Strategy, leadership, and execution are kind of my focus areas. So in the data space, so feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. And I write about this stuff all the time.
Awesome. We'll include that in the show notes. Thanks again for coming on. Thanks for sharing.
All right. Thanks. I appreciate you for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. We'll be back again. Different guest, different topic. If you found the episode useful, Aaron had a chock full of great nuggets in there. I was actually having to stop myself from just being a listener and remember I had to ask him some questions. But if you found it useful, share it with somebody else. That's how the podcast does grow. We don't do a ton of marketing. It's all organic. So appreciate everyone who does that. If you can, like, subscribe, give me some feedback, how it can improve. Always looking forward to that. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.